Chicken shit former Sergeant Brian Fahey from the Connecticut State Police has a shiny new arrest record. An update and clarification on the case of 14-year-old Emiliano and the whistleblower DA out of Salt Lake County, Utah. And an afterthought for our dangerous Jaywalker in Mansfield, Ohio. All on this week's episode of The Rebuttal. What's up, you guys? Welcome back to Southern Draw Law. My name is James White, criminal defense attorney, former prosecutor, former police officer. As I mentioned in last week's video, this is going to be a weekly series that we do called The Rebuttal, and that is where I address things that came up in the comments after the video was published or things that came up from previous videos of mine where there's, a little bit of information, deserves an update, but not necessarily enough for a whole video. That being said, we have 3 matters on the docket today to address, and I'm going to take them out of order. The one that deserves the most attention that we need to address is a few things happened after I covered the case of 14-year-old Emiliano, a teenager charged improperly with murder in Salt Lake County, Utah. Now, one of the primary disconnects I saw in the comment section after the video on Emiliano published was that people were having a hard time making the connection as to why it mattered in the case of prosecuting a teen simply because the lead prosecutor was having an extramarital affair with the lead detective. Well, there are a couple of different thoughts on this issue, and to be honest, it's just a perfect example of how something that didn't have to become a major issue became a monumental issue simply because it was allowed to exist in the dark. And this is why transparency is something that has to exist in government and why sunlight is the best disinfectant. Things have to come out and the public has to see it. We pay for it. That's what the whole purpose is. Now, if you haven't seen the video about Emiliano, it's a fascinating story. I intend to do a more thorough follow-up on it, but I just wanted to mention it to try to keep you guys interested in it because it's a story that once you have all the details is going to blow your mind. I'm going to leave the links to these full-length videos that I've done in the description. I would encourage you, if you haven't actually watched any of the videos that I'm talking about, pause this video, go back and actually watch them, and then come back and watch this so that you'll be familiar with what's going on. But all they would have had to do was for Adriana Davis to say, this is a conflict, I have to remove myself from this case. Then she could have continued whatever relationship existed with this detective, and there wouldn't have been any issue. The issue is the influence that relationship has on the prosecutorial decision-making about the case. What I can say is that there's a lot of things I know today that I didn't know at the time that I published this story, because after the story published, I received an email from Megan Mills, who, if you don't remember, was the whistleblower who quit her job. And there's so much more to that too, but she's the reason that we even know about this story. Now, to be clear, Megan's intentions in reaching out to me was not that so she could get more attention. She's actually very uncomfortable with the fact that she had to play any sort of public role in this case whatsoever. But her motivation in reaching out to me was just to let me know that she saw the piece and that she was thankful that I gave it more air and that I cared about it. But she also mentioned that there was so much more to the story than people do. I've asked Megan to come on and do a long-form interview where she can tell the story in its entirety with no time limits, no constraints, no corporate bosses, just tell the story exactly like it happened to the best of her ability. And she is trying to decide whether she believes that's in her best interest or Emiliano's best interest, or now that he's home and safe and thriving, whether it's just best to just let it go. But the details of this case are both fascinating and tragic. And I would like to be able to tell you that there's a clear motive and that there's a reason, like a good reason for all of this, but I can't. And look, I get why Megan is uncomfortable with any part of this story being about her, but this is the undeniable truth. If it wasn't for her, we wouldn't know about Emiliano. And Megan, if you're watching this, and I hope you are, there are thousands of Emilianos in this country right now. Poor kids from tough environments that are seen as throwaways. And that's bad enough. That's bad enough that that dynamic exists in our country. But what is so much worse is that there are thousands of Emilianos and there are 50 states that are willing to do what the state of Utah was willing to do to Emiliano under the leadership of Sim Gill and Adriana Davis. And that was that they were willing to make him collateral damage for their personal whims and to do what we call out on this channel every single week by turning the justice system into the just us system and forgetting about the people who were destroyed in the process. Of all the people that we talk about and we hear about, we never hear about the bravery of people like Megan. And honestly, it never really happens. I don't know of another incident in the time that I've been interested in this type of thing where a prosecutor has done what Megan did. Guys, she quit her job. She didn't just quit her job. After she found out that they leveraged Emiliano into pleading guilty for this case, she quit her job and she wrote a personal check for several $1,000s to hire him an attorney in order to set the plea aside. Now, it worked out that this other hero in this story named Nathan Evershed, who was ultimately the person who was able to get this done for Emiliano as his lawyer, took this case absolutely pro bono. He found out about it because he has a friendship with Megan. He decided to take this case on 100% free because of the injustices. I hope at some point to be able to sit down with Megan and Mr. Evershed just to get their takes on all this stuff. And I hope to be able to bring that entire story to you in some format soon. But as pitiful as it sounds, what we believe the motivation for this prosecution is that Adriana Davis began flirting with and having a relationship with Detective Lil. They were both married, but Detective Lil had a small child and his wife was very, very pregnant and getting ready to give birth to their second child. And at some point in the relationship that he had, the extramarital affair with Davis, he tries to pull back. And it is believed that Adriana Davis insisted on charging this case simply because it was an excuse to have interactions with Detective Lil, who was trying to retreat from this relationship. So what I thought when I first heard this story was that, man, why does this Lil? Was he an informant? Was there some relationship with this Tongan community? Was there, what do I not know? And it turns out we're not even sure that Detective Lil was the one pushing for this prosecution. It was just a desperate woman who wanted the attention of a man who was less interested in the relationship than she was. And this was her excuse for building that bridge of contact. And it's believed that this entire prosecution was both initiated and doubled down on by Adriana Davis for that purpose. That's it. And I'm completely comfortable with saying that. Based on the evidence that I was presented, that's what I believe to be true. And if Miss Davis wants to correct the record, my interview studio is open to her, just like it was Megan Mills, and she can tell her story, and I'll let you hear what she has to say too. But the facts of this case highlight why every single one of us should care about this case. And that is because the response from the elected DA, Sim Gill, was about one thing and one thing only. And that is keeping the true prosecutorial playbook in the dark and away from public view. Just don't give it oxygen, let it die, and eventually people will forget. Well, they miscalculated what Megan Mills was willing to turn a blind eye to and forget about. But what this is really about is the fact that prosecutors all over this country overcharge people to leverage them to pleading to charges that would probably be their worst day in court, simply so they can avoid putting the work in of having to prove the case. So in order for Sim Gill to be able to say, yeah, we got this wrong, he would have to admit what we all know to be true. Every DA's office in this country overcharges people and leverages them to plea. The problem is that due process exists for a reason. And it's not just Emiliano, right? The family of the person that was killed deserved to have their day in court too. The victim, to the extent that, regardless of where you land on this case, to the extent that you think this guy was a victim, that victim deserved to have a day in court too. And Emiliano has a right to a fair trial for whatever he's accused of. And the whole reason that these rules exist as far as bias and credibility and all that stuff is because if they're not willing to tell you that they're sleeping together, the fact that they would hide something so silly, something that should be between two consenting adults that didn't have anything to do with this, all they would have had to do was to separate from the prosecution. No, they don't even talk about it because the truth is that we see this every day. It exists on a continuum from police officers being willing to look up their ex-wife's new husband's information to try to harass them. They utilize the tools that are entrusted to them by the public because of their status as trustworthy law enforcement officers for their own advantage. And by doing that, they convert the justice system into a just us system. And nobody wants to talk about it. And it really is as simple as, if we can't trust you to tell us what we're entitled to know about whether or not the detective is credible, whether or not the prosecution has pure motives based on what the evidence says about the charges, then it's a violation of due process. And so, worst case scenario happens. If this person was murdered, no one's ever going to see any justice for it. If he wasn't murdered and this killing was justified, Emiliano spent 2 years of his life in secure detention and has been accused of murder and is surely traumatized from all this. He's been maliciously prosecuted and he's had his rights to a fair trial and due process violated by the state. And now we have to question whether or not the person who's leading the charge of the DA's office or running that place is trustworthy and free from corruption. We have to question the credibility of a West Valley detective. The Attorney General had to get involved and they had to FOIA request documents because the West Valley police wouldn't cooperate with them. Why? Over nothing. So that's what this story is really about. Unfortunately, Emiliano became collateral damage in all of that nonsense from people just trying to be lazy, unethical bureaucrats who want to personalize the criminal justice system for their own whims and their own gain. That's what this is all about. On to the next story. Remember the case of Charles Roberts, who was the man who was jaywalking across the street. He was stopped by Mansfield police officer Nelson, and the extent to which Nelson was authorized to do anything to him included nothing more than issuing him a citation for jaywalking at best, right? But Nelson tells him to put his hands on the vending machine, and Roberts says no. And that then results in Nelson laying hands on him, crushing him under both of their body weight and gravity, and breaking like 7 of his ribs. He ends up staying in the hospital for 6 days, has thousands of dollars in medical damages, right? So people come into the comments, and of course what they say is, he was actively resisting. This is my question, and this is the only point I really have to make about this case. Let's say that I see an attractive woman that I just want to kiss. So I walk up to her, and I say, hey, I'm going to kiss you, and you're going to stand still. Now, if said woman decided to defend herself from my advances, how crazy would it be if people responded to that by saying, well, she was actively resisting. What did she expect to happen? You would never say that. You would never say that about anybody else. Police officers are the only people on the planet that the public gives this free pass for doing whatever the fuck they want to people without consequence. As crazy as people would sound in the comment section from some lady being physically assaulted by a guy who just decided that he wanted to make her his, if they justified the conduct of the aggressor by saying, well, she was actively resisting, what did she expect to happen? You know, when a man wants to kiss you, you freaking let him do whatever he wants to do. What did you think what your job was? Do you think you have some sort of autonomy or free reign over your own body? Of course you don't. That's the craziest thing I've ever heard. But we do it for police officers. What bootlickers and morons don't understand is that a police officer has no more of a right to put their hands on you absent certain constitutional framework that has been well established for over 50 years than a man who just wants to walk up and kiss your wife because he thinks she's attractive. So a woman who has a right to defend herself from an aggressive person advancing on her is no different than a citizen refusing unlawful commands that a police officer does not have a right to give them. And for pushing back against a police officer who is putting their hands on them in the absence of certain things that are required under the law. And people who defend it sound just as crazy as someone who would defend a man in the scenario that I just described. So stop being a fucking idiot, think for yourself, and just because you are willing to acquiesce to somebody violating your body doesn't mean that everybody else should be okay with it. If you want to be an idiot and allow yourself to be violated simply because of the status of the person who is violating you, that is your prerogative. But you don't get to project that bullshit onto everybody else. And lastly, chicken shit former trooper Brian Fahey was charged with disorderly conduct. Now, it's bullshit. It's a chicken shit charge. It proves that the state attorney is also a chicken shit. His name's Fahey too. I'm not alleging that there's any connection between those two namesakes or that that's the reason. All I'm saying is disorderly conduct actually doesn't fit any of the factual scenarios. And if you haven't seen my breakdown on it, it was played both on my channel and it was seen by like 1 million people on Long Island Audit's channel, because he just played the whole video analysis in its entirety because he thought that much of it. If you haven't seen it, go watch it and come back and take note of what I'm saying here. Disorderly conduct didn't even fit what Fahey was doing until he got to a place where he was almost to the road. And so all of the things that he did, spitting in the face and all that stuff, all of those things were completely ignored by the state's attorney. So sure, he committed the offense of disorderly conduct, but it's absolutely bogus that that's all they charged him with. Now, Sean Paul's teased a little bit that the FBI is investigating. Maybe, and I'll give the state's attorney the benefit of the doubt here. Maybe state's attorney Fahey is holding off on bringing charges for menacing or whatever, and he just charged disorderly conduct because Fahey's going to be charged criminally by the federal government. But this is Trump's DOJ, and I don't see that happening. But you never know. You never know. It's possible that they're going to come in and charge him because he was holding a gun, unholstered, being threatening, committing the crime of threatening second, and announcing himself as a Connecticut state trooper. It's possible that they're going to charge him with deprivation of rights under color of law. But that's the only reason that I could see possible that the state's attorney might have held back on charging him with something other than disorderly conduct. But hopefully he gets convicted. I don't know. I have my doubts. Corrupt is corrupt. That's why it's called that. So we'll see what happens. Anyway, I appreciate you guys watching this. I really enjoy doing the rebuttal series. I'm going to continue to do it. Hopefully more people will watch it. Only like 20,000 people watched it from last week. We'll see what happens. But I'd like to invite you over to Substack to check out what I might say about this in companion blogs or whatever, or to follow up on some of the cases that we haven't talked about in the last couple episodes of the rebuttal. Substack is absolutely free to join. You can join on a paid tier if you want to, but that's only for people who want to support the channel monetarily. If you don't want to go to Substack, but you'd like to support monetarily, I'll leave my Venmo and PayPal links both here on the screen as well as in the description. Please remember to like and subscribe and leave a comment on the video. Check out some of the other videos on the channel and leave a comment on there as well. Until I see you again, take care. Always film your interactions with the police and keep your evidence to yourself.